Mr. Kaka Vidate and yourself. Hello, good
Hello.
evening, all of you.
Good evening, sir. Good
Uh,
evening.
my name is Vikrant Pande, and I am here with Mr. Kaka Vidate, the original author in Marathi for the best-selling book Duryodhan, which I have translated into English. And then we also have Ms. Aditi Banerjee, who has joined us from New York City. She's an author of the very famous Curse of Gandhari, and she's also a lawyer by training. Mr. Vidate wrote this book many years back, and it was a fantastic bestseller. And I thought that I should pick it up and translate this book. So I'll first ask Mr. Vidate to give a little bit about the book, and then Aditi, you can take over.
Okay, sir.
सर पुस्तकाबद्दल थोडं तुम्ही सांगाल का काय सिलेक्ट केलं आणि व्हॉट मेड यू चूज दिस टॉपिक?
सर, महाभारताचा अभ्यास करताना आपल्याला एक गोष्ट लक्षात घेतली पाहिजे की महाभारत हे एक म्हणजे ते काय म्हणजे धार्मिक वगैरे अशी कथा नसून ते एक राजकीय संघर्षाची कथा आहे आणि प्युअरली पॉलिटिकल म्हणजे त्याच्यामध्ये संघर्ष आहे. आणि दुर्योधनाचा विचार करताना म्हणजे कसं असतं की एखादं लढाई असेल किंवा युद्ध असेल तर त्याच्यामध्ये जसा जिंकणारा पक्ष असतो तसाच तो हरणाराही पक्ष असतो. तर जिंकणाऱ्या पक्षाचा इतिहास हा लिहिला जातो आणि त्याला आपण मग इतिहासाच्या पानामध्ये ते सजवतो. पण हरणाऱ्याची सुद्धा एक बाजू असते आणि ती हरणाऱ्याची बाजू नेमकी काय आहे हा विचार मी महाभारत वाचताना केला. आणि महाभारत वाचताना काही ठिकाणी काही जागा मला अशा आढळल्या की दुर्योधनाची बाजू ही मांडली पाहिजे आणि दुर्योधनाची जरी ती हरलेली बाजू असली तरी ती मांडली पाहिजे अशा दृष्टिकोनातून मी त्या महाभारताचा विचार केला आणि दुर्योधनाच्या बाजूने ते महाभारत दिलं. म्हणजे बाजूनी म्हणण्यापेक्षा महाभारतामध्ये ज्या घटना आहेत प्रत्यक्षात त्याच घटना वेगळ्या अँगलने बघून त्याच्यातून नेमका अर्थ काढून मी दुर्योधन ही कादंबरी लिहिली.
Aditi, what Mr. Vidate is saying is that it's not a religious book, Mahabharat, and I'm sure you have written a lot about it. And he said that it was important to put the point of view of what one would call as a loser, not necessarily the loser, but the other party. And it is important that that voice was heard. And that's what made him dive deep into Mahabharat and look at the whole story from the Duryodhan and the Kauravas point of view.
No, that's great. And one of the fascinating things I found about the book is not only does it cover perspectives from Duryodhana, but also from Dhritarashtra, from Bhanumati, from others. And I would very much like to know from Mr. Vidate how he got into those perspectives or what he was thinking when he explored each of those characters.
Sir, Bhanumati, Shakuni, Dhritarashtra यांचे कॅरेक्टर्स बद्दल हाऊ डिड यू गेट इन टू द कॅरेक्टर? कसं त्याचं त्यांच्याबद्दलचं मत, त्यांचं ओपिनियन, हाऊ डिड यू डाईव्ह इन टू इट?
मुळात कसं आहे की दुर्योधन ही दुर्योधनाची कथा आहे आणि दुर्योधनाची कथा सांगताना त्याच्याशी संबंधित असलेली जी माणसं आहेत, मग ती भानुमती असेल, मग तो शकुनी असेल किंवा दुःशासन असेल किंवा धृतराष्ट्र असेल आणि त्याच्या विरुद्ध पक्षाला असलेली कृष्ण ही असेल किंवा त्याचा सहकारी कर्ण असेल, तर दुर्योधनाविषयीची त्यांची मतं काय आहेत, दुर्योधनाकडे ते कोणत्या दृष्टिकोनातून बघत होते आणि दुर्योधन त्यांच्याकडून कोणत्या दृष्टीने बघत होता, ह्याचा विचार मी केला आणि महाभारतामधला जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट आहे तोच घेऊन तो विचार मी केला. उदाहरणार्थ आता भानुमती ही दुर्योधनाची पत्नी आहे, दुर्योधनाने तिचं हरण केलेलं आहे. अशा परिस्थितीमध्ये तिच्या मनामध्ये दुर्योधनाविषयी म्हणजे राग असणं स्वाभाविक आहे, पण तो राग असताना सुद्धा एका संयमाने, अतिशय संयमाने त्यानं तिला जिंकलं, म्हणजे तिचं मन जिंकलं आणि त्यानंतर ती निष्ठावान अशी पत्नी त्याची झाली. कर्ण हा त्याचा मित्र होता, कर्णासाठी खूप काही त्यानं केलं, पण हे सगळं करत असताना एक विशिष्ट असा दृष्टिकोन होता त्याचा. अर्थात दुर्योधन म्हणजे काय, तो एक राजकीय व्यक्तिमत्व असल्यामुळे स्वार्थ त्याला सुटलेला नव्हता. कर्णाचा वापर त्याला करायचा होता आणि कर्णालाही माहित होतं. पण हे सगळं करत असताना ऐन युद्धाच्या प्रसंगी कर्णाची जी अवस्था झाली ती अशी अवस्था झाली की तो पांडवांना मारू शकला नाही आणि त्याला सत्य समजल्यानंतर त्याचं जे काही लढाईचा जोम होता तो निघून गेला आणि कर्ण मारला गेला. अशा परिस्थितीमध्ये दुर्योधनाने चिंतन केलेलं आहे कर्णाच्या स्वभावाविषयी की तो असा का वागला. शकुनीचं आपण उदाहरण घेऊया. गांधारी ही अतिशय म्हणजे अवखळ अशी एक कन्या. हे भीष्म तिथे गेले भीष्माचार्य आणि त्या गांधारीला म्हणजे त्या राजाला म्हणजे त्याच्यावर दबाव आणून स्वतःच्या आंधळ्या पुत्रासाठी धृतराष्ट्रासाठी त्यानं ती गांधारी मिळवली. स्वाभाविक आहे त्या स्त्रीला म्हणजे ह्या सगळ्या प्रसंगाविषयी वाईट वाटणं स्वाभाविक आहे. दुसरं असं की त्याचा भाऊ असलेला शकुनी इतका हा म्हणजे दांडगाई करून आपली बहीण नेणं आणि एका आंधळ्याशी तिची गाठ मारणं याच्यामुळं शकुनीला स्वाभाविकपणाने त्याच्याविषयी राग येणं स्वाभाविक आहे. आणि असं असताना हे सगळं त्यानं सहन केलेलं असताना सुद्धा ज्यावेळी राज्य द्यायची वेळ आली किंवा राज्यावर कोण बसायचं असा प्रश्न निर्माण झाला तर त्यावेळी भीष्माचार्य द्रोणाचार्य ही जी मोठी मंडळी होती तर यांनी म्हणजे बोटशेपी भूमिका घेतली. म्हणजे दुर्योधनाचं भविष्य उद्ध्वस्त व्हावं अशा दृष्टिकोनातून त्यांनी ती भूमिका घेतल्यामुळं शकुनीला त्या दुर्योधनाची बाजू घेऊन उभं राहावं लागलं. म्हणजे त्याची सुद्धा एक भूमिका होती. म्हणजे प्रत्येक व्यक्तिरेखेची या कथेमध्ये भूमिका आहे आणि त्या व्यक्तिरेखेच्या भूमिकेतून त्यांच्या रोलकडे बघितलेलं आहे आणि ते मी मांडलेलं आहे.
Each character, Aditi, the author says, is he has looked at it from their point of view as to how they see Bhanumati was forcibly, I mean, got married to he picked her up. It was not a swayamvar. But she was naturally angry when Duryodhan behaved in a manner in Vasraran, but yet she deals with him with a lot of in a matured manner. Shakuni is upset that his sister Gandhari was forcibly married to Dhritarashtra, who is a blind king. And at the same time, he feels bad that his nephews are not being taken care of. So it is from Shakuni's point of view, the author looks at this entire Mahabharat. Karna, again, Duryodhan uses him in a selfish manner, but he at the same time introspects as to what Karna is doing. And the author tries to get into the mind of Duryodhan to see how does he look at Karna. He knows that he has used him for a selfish reason because Karna is the best. At the same time, he understands his emotions. And those are some of the things the author tries to put looking into their minds and from Duryodhan's perspective.
Yes. And Vikrant, I would like to ask you, what about this book made you want to translate it, and why do you think it is important to bring it to a wider audience in English?
I was very fascinated when I read the original Marathi Duryodhan, and this was the first time I found a book which was really giving a view from the loser's perspective. Invariably what happens is that we do not get to hear the lion and the deer. The lion eats the prey. You don't get to hear the loser's perspective. And what I liked was that Duryodhan was really talking about principles. He gets upset that I am the legitimate son of my father, unlike the Pandavas, who are not even the legitimate sons of Pandu. And yet there seems to be a clamor from a hereditary right perspective. And he says that you do not have any hereditary right. If you ask me for any land, I don't mind giving it to you, but you're demanding it as a hereditary right. And I don't think you have a right to then even a land which is on the tip of a needle. If you ask me, beg me, request me to give, I don't mind giving it to you. So he was fighting on principles, and he was also very upset that somebody like a Dronacharya or Kripacharya, who are otherwise in quote unquote, servants of the empire, are tending to support the Pandavas while they profess their loyalty to the king, emperor, who is Dashrath. I mean, who is Dhritarashtra. So I thought that this needed to be told as a story when you're talking about a mythology. I think it's important to hear what does Shakuni feel about it, what does Karna feel about it, and I think those aspects have been brought out very well in the novel.
Yes, and I think one of the unique things of in Indian Itihasa Purana, the so-called bad characters are never, true, like fully bad, and neither are the heroes perfect. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
nuance and complexity. So, for example, with Duryodhana, it is said he was an able administrator of Hastinapur, of the kingdom. That the subjects were not necessarily unhappy under him, although of course they were
very happy.
Yes, they were happy. Although of course they had a lot of love for Pandu and then Yudhishthira and the Pandavas. But that is interesting, and we all know about Karna and his generosity and all of those things. And so I think along those lines, I'd be curious for your perspective as well as Mr. Vidate's perspective on what is it that readers today can gain from hearing these perspectives of these lesser known or darker voices, and what can they perhaps teach us?
I will answer, then I'll ask Mr. Vidate to also chip in. I think one of the unfortunate things of Mahabharata is that it is not a victory for anyone either. It's what is very commonly called as a Pyrrhic victory, because at the end of it, everyone was a loser. And this is, I look at leaders today, and when we're working in a highly competitive space today in almost all the industries we talk about, there's nothing called a monopoly. It's not about competition, but cooperation. And it's about living together, finding the niche in which I can support my customers or my segment, my employees, and not necessarily by my way or my highway. I think what Duryodhan was trying to talk about is my way or the highway. While he might be right from a principle point of view, I think as a leader, he could have easily accommodated the Pandavas who were just demanding 5 villages. And he could have used their strengths, to his advantage, because all the Pandavas carried unique traits which were fantastic. So I think for today's leadership, I would say cooperation, I would talk about team building, and I would say that leadership is about finding the best in your team and giving them an opportunity to come to their best. विद्यार्थी साहेब, द क्वेश्चन वॉज की आजच्या जमान्यात लीडर्स आपण बघतो, तर दुर्योधनाचं आपण महाभारताची स्टोरी बघितली, तर लीडर्स तुमच्या हिशोबाने व्हॉट शुड दे डू, हाऊ कॅन दे टेक इन्स्पिरेशन फ्रॉम महाभारत, आणि आजच्या लीडर्सनी काय करायला पाहिजे?
महाभारताचं हे युद्ध हे जे आहे तर ते राज्याच्या कारणावरून झालेलं आहे. म्हणजे त्यावेळी जो झगडा होता, म्हणजे राजकीय झगडा जो होता, तोच राजकीय झगडा आजही आपल्याला दिसतो. त्यामुळं महाभारतामध्ये जो राजकीय झगडा आहे त्याच्यावरून खूप काही बोध घेण्यासारखं आहे. आजच्या नेतृत्वाला सुद्धा खूप काही बोध घेण्यासारखं आहे. कुठे अतिरेक केल्यानंतर त्याचा परिणाम काय होतो आणि कशा पद्धतीनं त्याला सामोरं जावं लागतं, हे आजच्या नेतृत्वाला त्याच्यातून शिकण्यासारखं आहे. दुसरं असं की स्वार्थाची सीमा कुठवर असावी, म्हणजे कोणाचाही, त्यांचा असो यांचा असो, दोन्ही पक्षाचा जो स्वार्थ आहे त्या स्वार्थातून जनकल्याण काय साधणार आहे का, हा विचार व्हायला पाहिजे. महाभारतातून हे सांगितलं गेलेलं आहे की ज्यावेळी टोकाची भूमिका दोन्ही बाजूनी घेतली जाते आणि केवळ राजकीय स्वार्थ हाच त्याच्यामध्ये मुख्य असतो, तर त्यावेळी त्याच्यातून जनतेचं कल्याण काही होत नसतं आणि जनतेचं कल्याण त्याच्यातून अपेक्षित करता येत नाही. त्यामुळं महाभारत ही नुसती लढाईची कथा नाही, नुसती लढाईची कथा नाही, तर ती एक प्रचंड अशा विनाशाची कथा आहे. आणि हा विनाश कशामुळे झाला हे अगदी स्पष्ट असल्यामुळं आजच्या राजकीय नेतृत्वाला सुद्धा हा विनाश कसा टाळता येईल ह्याच्यावर त्यांना विचार करता येऊ शकतो. दुसरं असं की हा जो प्रचंड विनाश झालेला आहे, या विनाशातून मनुष्य जातीची प्रचंड हानी झाली, जे मोठा रक्तपात झाला, माणसं मारली गेली, ज्या ज्या वेळी अशा प्रकारे विनाशक स्वरूपाचे विचार समोर येतात, त्या त्यावेळी समाजाचा आणि एकूणच याचा विध्वंस ठरलेला असतो. आणि ह्या विध्वंसातून म्हणजे काहीही जनकल्याण होत नाही, हा बोध आजच्या राजकारण्यांना महाभारतातून घेता येऊ शकेल.
Right, Aditi, what the author is saying is that it's a political fight, and it's great learning for today is that anything you stretch to the extreme, there are going to be extreme reactions, and in Mahabharata also everybody loses, and finally it's all round destruction which happened in Mahabharata. So that's a great learning or a warning to the leaders today that if you try to stretch anything for your own selfish reasons, finally the nobody is a winner.
Another thing I would like to ask, so one of the fascinating things to me about Duryodhana is his relationship with Karna, and it's one thing that seems to humanize him, because while there are obviously political aspects to the relationship and gaining his favor, there also seems to be a very genuine bond between the two of them, and I think to a lesser extent also with Bhanumati. So even though that may not really be there in the original Mahabharata, at least the way it has come down to us through retellings, this idea of a very loving relationship between the two, despite the circumstances of their initial wedding, when Karna actually kidnaps her for Duryodhana. So I would like to get both of your perspectives on that.
Yes, I think Duryodhan clearly came to help Karna when Karna was in trouble, and he stepped forward and offered him a kingdom and gave him the prestige for which Karna was eternally grateful. He was sort of always burdened by the fact that this was one person who stood by me. Duryodhan does realize that he is using Karna for a selfish reason, because he knows that Karna is the best among all the Pandavas. And he does introspect on that issue, saying that he knows that he's using him. Yet at the same time, there's a tremendous affection and a bond between the two. And Karna, being the loyalist he is, even after knowing that he is Kunti's eldest son, says that no, I'm not going to ever allow my friendship to be sacrificed for my blood relation. And very beautifully, he also Karna puts, saying that Krishna has played a political game where he came in at the very last moment and almost made him weaponless. That was the final weapon uh, 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 Krishna had, which he used at the very last moment to just defeat Karna even before he got into the battle. And yet, despite that, Karna decides that he's going to support his friend. Bhanumati is shown as a very interesting character who is very, very loyal, extremely affectionate to Duryodhan. And she expresses her hurt, saying that I could never imagine that my husband would actually disrobe Draupadi in full public view. And she wonders for a moment that is this really my husband who did this vile act? And I would like the author, Kaka साहेब, टू से की सर भानुमती आणि कर्णाबद्दल आणि भानुमतीचं काय रिॲक्शन होती, आणि दुर्योधनाचं भानुमती आणि कर्णाशी काय संबंध होता, आणि त्याच्याबद्दल तुम्ही कसं आपल्या पुस्तकात त्याला मांडलंय.
भानुमती ही मुळात एक राजकन्या होती, ती सुसंस्कृत होती. जरी तिच्या बाबतीत सुरुवातीला दुर्योधनाने तिचं जरी हरण केलेलं असलं, तरी तिनं नंतर त्यानं संयमाने तिला जिंकलं. ज्यावेळी द्रौपदीचं वस्त्रहरण झालं, त्यावेळी सगळेच बेतालपणाने वागले. कर्ण बेतालपणाने वागला, दुर्योधन वागला, आणि कुरूंच्या सभेमधले हे जे काही ज्येष्ठ लोक होते त्यांना त्यावर काही म्हणजे ते काही करू शकले नाहीत. तर एक स्त्रीचा अपमान झाला, तर स्त्री म्हणून भानुमतीची काय प्रतिक्रिया होती हे दुर्योधनमध्ये दाखवलेलं आहे. म्हणजे तिला सामोरं जाणं त्याला लज्जास्पद वाटलं, म्हणून तो तिला टाळून बरेच दिवस तो एकांतात राहत होता. आणि ही तिथे गेली आणि तिनं या द्रौपदी वस्त्रहरणाबद्दल त्याला जाब मागितला. त्यानं त्याच्या परीनं समर्थन करायचा प्रयत्न केला. पण एक लक्षात घेतलं पाहिजे की एका स्त्रीची व्यथा किंवा वेदना जाणून घेताना भानुमती एक पत्नी होती. म्हणजे दोन भूमिका तिला स्पष्टपणाने हे करायच्या होत्या. एक म्हणजे स्त्री म्हणून द्रौपदीविषयीची सहानुभूती, आणि आपला पती जरी चुकलेला असला तरी तो शेवटी पती आहे आणि मी पत्नी आहे ह्या दृष्टिकोनातून त्याला समजून घेतलं पाहिजे, अशी एक भावना. अशा दृष्टिकोनातून भानुमतीचं जे पुढचं जे कॅरेक्टर आहे ते अशा पद्धतीनं ते उभं राहिलेलं आहे. कर्णाविषयी म्हटलं तर कर्णाला अत्यंत अडचणीच्या आणि अपमानास्पद स्थितीमध्ये दुर्योधनाने उचलून धरलं. आता हे उचलून धरताना कर्णाबद्दल म्हणजे त्याचं शौर्य, त्याचा पराक्रम पुढे मागे आपल्या उपयोगी येईल हा विचार दुर्योधनाच्या मनात होताच. पण हे सगळं
Right.
करत असताना सुद्धा कुठेतरी त्याच्या मनामध्ये ही भावना होती की जो पराक्रमी आहे, जो योग्य आहे त्याचा सन्मान झाला पाहिजे, आणि त्याचा अपमान केवळ तो जातीच्या दृष्टिकोनातून किंवा त्याच्या सूत असल्यामुळं त्याचा जो अपमान होतो तो झाला नाही पाहिजे, अशा दृष्टीने वीरांचा सन्मान करण्याची एक भावना दुर्योधनाच्या मनामध्ये होती. आणि त्या दृष्टिकोनातून कर्णाला
Aditi,
त्यानं वापर केला.
what the author is saying is, Bhanumati struggles because after a lot of time, Duryodhan manages to get her on his side when she was initially, abducted by Karna, and they are a very very loving couple, and she struggles between the two roles she plays as a wife to Duryodhan and as a woman, and Duryodhan also is not able to face his wife for many days, sitting alone in his room, getting drunk, and he has no justification to offer. And it's a very poignant scene the author has brought out in the novel. Regarding Karna, again, while he did use him for his selfish reasons, but beyond that, he genuinely believed that this was the person who needed to be given that recognition which nobody was offering, and Duryodhan stepped forward and made him the king of Angadesh. And that was something he did out of genuine belief that a person who has been so, taunted by everybody else needs to be given that platform so that he can stand on his own. And that's what Duryodhan did, and Karna was eternally obliged to him.
Yes. Another thing I would like to ask is, I think there's a very rich tradition of retellings, particularly in the vernacular languages of India, starting from soon after the Mahabharata was, let's say, like codified, of plays, stories, folk tales, novels like this one, which bring out some of the aspects of the Mahabharata. And it's always been a very seamless tradition, and finding new ways of accessing the Mahabharata and bringing it to wider audiences. And do you find there's a difference between that tradition and some of perhaps the more modern retellings that are happening in English, which tend to perhaps sometimes glorify particular characters or take a more of a modern take? Do you see a difference between the two of them? The questions for both of you.
Yeah, I'll answer first. Yeah, I think, Aditi, today I'm finding that people are becoming more creative. At the same time, it's not about taking creative liberty, but talking about characters which otherwise were not that expressed beautifully, like your book on the Gandhari, or there are some other books on Karna's wife, or people are discovering characters from Mahabharata and Ramayana, especially, which were hitherto, in some sense, very linear in their presentation. Duryodhan is a classic case in point, where a lot of times when I had read Mahabharata in the childhood, you would have just a few lines about Bhanumati or Shakuni or Ashwatthama, and not really get into the depth below the skin of the character to understand what they felt. And I think today a lot of authors are, I would not use the word liberty, but creative expression in getting out and discovering these characters which are always there in Mahabharata and Ramayana, but presenting them to the, so it's a combination of mythology and itihas. And I think it is important that some of these characters are brought to life, which is what is happening today with a Duryodhan or a Gandhari, or I'm told there are some 25,000 or such odd characters in the Mahabharata, and many of them deserve to be brought to the fore. Question to the author, sir,
येस सर.
की पहिले आपण इतिहास किंवा महाभारत लहानपणी वाचायचो, तर त्याच्यात एक पर्टिक्युलर पद्धत होती, आणि आता तुमच्यासारखे लेखक नवीन नवीन कॅरेक्टर्सला, म्हणजे नवीन कॅरेक्टर्स नाही पण त्या कॅरेक्टर्सला नवीन रूपात पुढे आणतात आहे. तर त्याच्याबद्दल आपलं काय मत आहे, आणि हाऊ डू यू फील अबाउट इट?
रामायण असो किंवा महाभारत असो किंवा आपली पुराणं असो, तर प्रत्येक व्यक्तिरेखा ही म्हणजे त्याच्यावर पुनर्विचार झाला पाहिजे. म्हणजे परंपरागतरित्या जे नोशन आपल्या पुढे आलेलं आहे, परंपरागतरित्या ज्या गोष्टी आपल्या समोर सांगितल्या गेलेल्या आहेत, त्याची चिकित्सा झाली पाहिजे. असे कितीतरी कॅरेक्टर्स आहेत की ज्याच्याबद्दल पुनर्विचार करण्याची गरज आहे. आणि दुसरं असं की प्रत्येक लेखकाने असो, विचारवंतांनी असो, आपल्या ह्या पुराणातल्या घटना असतील किंवा महाकाव्यातल्या घटना असतील, ह्या घटनांचं विश्लेषण आपापल्या परीने करण्याची गरज आहे. आणि हे विश्लेषण केलं म्हणून काहीतरी नवीन आपण केलं किंवा एखाद्याची बाजू चुकीची असताना आपण बाजू घेतली असं म्हणून त्याच्यावर टीका करण्याची गरज नाही. कोणाला ज्याला ज्या दृष्टिकोनातून ते व्यक्तिरेखा भावली, त्या दृष्टिकोनातून त्या व्यक्तिरेखेचा पुनर्विचार झाला पाहिजे. आणि हेच तर विचारांचं स्वातंत्र्य आहे, आणि हेच तर म्हणजे लेखनाचं स्वातंत्र्य आहे.
I think this is the freedom and the literary freedom an author has, and what the author is saying is that it is important to put different perspectives which have been missing so far, and a reinterpretation, a representation of the mythology is important today for the young readers, for the new readers today, to know what they feel about these classics which have been written thousands of years back.
Yes, and there's actually a beautiful example of that in one of the classic Sanskrit plays, I think by Pasha, and it actually talks about Duryodhana, and he's having a conversation with Gandhari, and he's saying, I know I've committed a lot of papa, but my one hope is that at birth after birth, I'm born to you as my mother. So it's a very beautiful expression that I think it amplifies and sweetens the Mahabharata in a sense, which I think is the role of all that great literature, including Kaka Sahib's book. And then Vikrant, one thing I wanted to ask you, and I just wanted to note, we do have some comments coming through, and we will address them a little bit later in the conversation. So please do keep sending questions and comments. We will get to all of them. But Vikrant, one thing I wanted to ask you is, nowadays, one thing that struck me when I read your translation, because I don't have the ability to read it in the original, was it was so lucid and clear. I didn't feel like I was reading a translation. I felt like I was reading the original, which is it's a very rare achievement, and shows what a wonderful translator you are. But nowadays, there's a lot of discussion on the difficulties of translation. Part of it is literary, part of it is also cultural or civilizational. So there's a book that Rajiv Malhotra brought out on Sanskrit non-translatables, or whether there are certain words or concepts that can't be put into English. And I think you, having done such a great job, not just with this book, but with other books, what is your approach to translation? Are you do you try to be very literal and stick to the original as much as possible, or do you try to convey the sense or the ethos or an aesthetic of the original, which may require taking some more liberties, and how do you balance those considerations?
Yes, Aditi, I would answer that in a there's a favorite phrase of mine where a translator does consciously what an author does instinctively. So the author has written the book instinctively, and I'm doing a very conscious effort to ensure that what I'm writing appeals to the reader in English, because he's not going to read that in Marathi. And yes, I believe that I would put the creative freedom trying to understand what the author wanted to convey rather than translating what he has written in the book. So my effort is to read the lines and try and go behind the lines to understand what is the essence, what is the message the author is really trying to convey. And which is why I feel, Aditi, and thanks for your kind words, that it doesn't look like a transliteration, but it looks like an original English book, because I've tried to, as Gulzar says, that if you're if you're loyal, then you're not very beautiful, and if you're beautiful, then you're probably not very loyal to the text. And I like to maintain the beauty, at the same time, the essence of what the author is trying to convey is very critical, but the words are mine. The way I present them is mine. And so, in that sense, the English would look kind of different from the Marathi original if you were to compare the text. But at the same time, I take a lot of effort to try and ensure that I have got the essence of what the author was trying to say in Marathi and put that in my own words in English.
Okay. And can you share with the audience a little bit about your journey and how you started on this venture of translating some of these Marathi classics, and what brought you to that, and why you feel it's so important?
Oh yes, it was kind of serendipitous. Luckily, in Marathi, there are amazing books and the classics over the last 30, 40 years. I was quite surprised when I did a few of Ranjit Desai, who is a very famous Marathi author, and I did his Raja Ravi Verma, and then Shriman Yogi and Radheya Karna. I realized that there are amazing gems in Marathi, which have not been translated. So my first book was Raja Ravi Verma by Ranjit Desai. I happen to have a little bit of understanding of Raja Ravi Verma because I live in Baroda. There's a wonderful museum where we have 14 Ravi Verma paintings. And I had also collected a lot of oleographs of Ravi Verma. And surprisingly, I found that there was no book other than that in Marathi, which has a very beautiful biography of the celebrated painter. The book was also used by Chetan Mehta to make a movie called Rangrasiya. Uh, Same way with Rao, Bajirao Mastani, Nagnath Inamdar. Again, a fascinating story based on which the movie was made, Bajirao Mastani. And I realized that there are amazing gems in Marathi, and the only way for them to really go out to a pan Indian and then maybe a global audience is that they are into English, which is a language I'm very comfortable with. Uh, and I thought that this needed to be told. So my uh, journey on translation began with Ranjit Desai's book. I actually translated his short stories called More Monkey Savlaya, which are beautiful short stories of nature, but they never got published so far. And then I took up Ravi Verma, which was published by HarperCollins. And I've also been lucky, Aditi, that my editor in HarperCollins, Meenakshi, who is now the editor of Amazon, actually sort of gave me a carte blanche saying that if you like a Marathi book, we would love to translate that. And actually, she discovered Kaka Vidate's Duryodhan and said, Vikrant, have you read this book? Because it's fascinating. And the moment I read the first 20 pages, I said, we should go ahead and do it because this is wonderful. So I have done so far, uh, Duryodhan is my 11th translation. And shortly we're coming out with Sambhaji with Amazon, Westland, which would be my 12th translation done by the original author is Vishwas Patil, who has also written a book called Panipat. Uh, Sambhaji again is a fascinating character about the son of Shivaji, very less known and highly misunderstood. So I'm looking forward to that book as well.
Great. And a question for Kaka Sahib. So I think nowadays, the younger audiences are losing the connection with the original Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which most people don't read nowadays, and also particularly for those of us who are born in the U.S. or in the West and may not have familiarity with our native tongues. For those of us like myself who want to write about the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Puranas. What advice do you have on how we can continue those traditions and the Sanskriti that are there in the classics, but in English, which has its own challenges? And then and any thoughts on, because I do feel it's important, these classic texts that are there in the vernacular languages, on preserving them, bringing them out to a wider audience. What are some good ways of that we can do that? Did we lose Vikrant? I mean, just give him a moment. Are you back?
Yes. Yeah, so I heard you, Aditi. काकासाहेब, प्रश्न असा होता की आजकालचं जो जनरेशन आहे आणि जे जास्त इंग्लिशमध्ये वाचतात किंवा मराठी किंवा क्लासिक संस्कृतमध्ये त्यांचं वाचन खूप कमी होतं, तर हे जे आपले सगळे टेक्स्ट आहे हे करंट जनरेशन मध्ये कसे कंटिन्यू व्हावे आणि त्याच्यासाठी काय करायला पाहिजे असं आपण, की त्यांना रस आणि इंटरेस्ट कंटिन्यू राहावा आणि त्यांनी ह्या मायथॉलॉजी किंवा आपले क्लासिक्स जे आहे त्याचा पण आस्वाद घ्यावा आणि त्याच्याबद्दल जास्ती माहिती त्यांना मिळायला पाहिजे. तर हाऊ वुड इट बी पॉसिबल?
नाही, आपण एक लक्षात घेतलं पाहिजे की मग ते महाभारत असो, रामायण असो किंवा आत्ताचा सध्याचा काळ असो, मानवी प्रवृत्ती ही इथून तिथून सारखी आहे. म्हणजे ही जी महाकाव्य आहेत किंवा पुराणं आहेत किंवा त्याच्यामध्ये व्यक्तिरेखा ज्या वर्णिलेल्या आहेत, वर्णन केलेल्या, ती सगळी मानवी प्रवृत्ती दाखवलेली आहे आणि ती मानवी प्रवृत्ती तेव्हाच जी होती तीच मानवी प्रवृत्ती आताही आहे. म्हणजे काळ बदलतो पण मानवाचं मन कधी बदलत नसतं, त्याची विचारांची जी काही पद्धत असते ती बदलत नसते. त्यामुळं त्यावेळचा इतिहास सुद्धा, त्यावेळच्या ज्या कथा आहेत त्या सुद्धा आधुनिक भाषेमध्ये, म्हणजे आधुनिक विचारांच्या दृष्टिकोनातून त्या जर मांडल्या, म्हणजे रामायणातल्या असोत, महाभारतातल्या असोत, आणि असा आता तो तसा प्रयोग सुरू झालेला आहे, तर त्या जर मांडल्या तरी त्या अपील जास्तीत जास्त आजच्या वाचकांना सुद्धा त्या अपील होतात. कारण काळ जरी जुना असला तरी माणूस तोच आहे. त्यामुळं ह्या कथा म्हणजे आपल्या पुराणातल्या असतील, महाभारतामधल्या असतील, रामायणामधल्या असतील, महाकाव्यामधल्या असतील, ह्या सगळ्या कथा आज संस्कृतमध्ये कोणी वाचत नाही. दुसरं असं की महाभारताचे सगळेच्या सगळे मोठमोठे खंड घेऊन कोणी समोर बसत नसतं, तेवढा वेळही नाही लोकांकडे. त्यामुळं आता आमच्यासारख्या लेखकांनी किंवा आणखी लेखकांनी ह्या ज्या कथामध्ये जे काय सांगितलेलं आहे, म्हणजे मानवी प्रवृत्ती काय आहे याचं चित्रण करणं आणि ते वाचकांसमोर मांडणं, की जेणेकरून पूर्वीचा काळ कसा होता, आताचा काळ कसा आहे, काय फरक झाला, फरक काहीच झालेला नाही, मानवी प्रवृत्ती इथून तिथून सारखी आहे, हे सांगणं आणि नव्या रूपामध्ये लोकांच्या समोर ते मांडणं आणि त्यांना वाचायला प्रवृत्त करणं. म्हणजे तुमची लिहिण्याची शैली अशी असली पाहिजे की ते वाचायला प्रवृत्त झाले पाहिजे. जसं आता उदाहरणार्थ तुम्ही मगाशी बोललात, आता दुर्योधनचं तुम्ही जे भाषांतर केलेलं आहे, हे भाषांतर इंग्रजी वाचकाला अक्षरशः बांधून ठेवेल किंवा खेळवून ठेवेल असं ते भाषांतर झालेलं आहे. मी स्वतः वाचलं आणि त्याच्यामधून आपल्याला म्हणजे ही कथा तुम्ही ज्या पद्धतीने मांडलेली आहे त्या पद्धतीने ती लोकांना अपील होऊ शकते.
He says that human tendencies have not changed, Aditi, over generations. And what is important is that the young generation would not read those voluminous epics. It needs to be presented to them in a manner which they would enjoy reading. But the core message is that the human tendencies over centuries have not really changed. But it is important for an author to ensure that it is presented in a manner which becomes appealing, which becomes interesting, and the generation, the millennials of today, would like to pick it up and read those books.
Very true. And then Vikrant, one thing I wanted to ask you is, could you tell us a little bit about your upcoming projects? You mentioned about Shambhaji, but also some other projects I know you're working on.
Yes, so translations have been my passion. I've been doing that for the last 5 years, and I continue to do that. So the book which is coming out with Amazon immediately is Sambhaji, which is an iconic book by Vishwas Patil. I am also I recently translated a very different book from the lot of historical fiction which I've done largely. A book called Goldie, which just got published recently by Manjul Prakashan, which was a biography of the filmmaker, editor, uh, actor Goldie Anand, who is Dev Anand's brother. There are a couple of translations which I have in mind, which I'm talking to Amazon. One of them is on there were 100 years of Lokmanya Tilak's death, and we're looking at a very scholarly work by one very eminent Marathi scholar, Sadanand More. I'm hoping to do that with Amazon. Tilak is a character which is not really known to the current generation much, and because he was even before Gandhiji in that sense, and that's another translation I'm looking at. I'm also the HarperCollins would come out with my own book on the footsteps of Ram, which is a very interesting journey of a travelogue of the Ram's Vanvas, 14 years from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka, and discovering local folklore and unknown stories of Ramayana, which are not there in mentioned in Valmiki or Tulsi or the Kamba Ramayana. So the idea is to present to people two things. One is about the place itself, whether it's Chitrakoot or Panchavati or Kishkinda or Rameshwaram or Sri Lanka, and then talk about a lot of stories which are not known to people. With Amazon, I'm doing a fascinating history of the State Bank of India. It looks like a very sort of a boring topic, but it's a fascinating story where State Bank started its journey 200 years back in 1806 as a presidency bank, the Bank of Bengal, and it's a combination of a history of India, the history of banking itself in India, and the history of State Bank, which is India's largest bank and the oldest 220-year-old bank. So those are some of the things I'm working on right now.
Oh, that's great. They all sound fascinating. I'm particularly excited about the book on Rama's journey. So,
Ramayana. Yeah.
yes. We do have some comments that have come through. So maybe we can address some of them. So some of the ones we received are about how to view characters such as Ashwatthama and Ekalavya. So for both of you, what are your thoughts on them?
I will ask the author first. साहेब तो प्रश्न असा होता की एकलव्याबद्दल आपलं काय मत आहे?
एकलव्य हा भिल्लांचा राजकुमार होता.
Maybe
एका शूद्र
would it be
जातीमध्ये.
possible for you to speak in Hindi, sir? ते कारण की ऑडियन्सला पण कळेल.
ठीक है, ओके. एकलव्य जो था वो एक भिल्लों का शाहजादा था, राजा था, और शूद्र होने के बावजूद भी वो ऊपर उठने की कोशिश करता था, और इसलिए उसने द्रोणाचार्य के पास विद्या हासिल करने की कोशिश की. उसके बाद उसका संबंध कौरव युवराजों से आया, दुर्योधन से उसका संबंध आया. तो एकलव्य के बारे में सोचना, हम जब सोचते हैं तो ऐसा है कि जो गिरा हुआ समाज ने जिसे गिरा हुआ माना था, वो ऊपर उठने की कोशिश इतनी तेजी से और जोर से कर रहा था कि उसने अपनी हैसियत, अपनी योग्यता इतनी बढ़ाई कि वो जो श्रेष्ठ माने जाने वाले लोग थे, उनके लिए भी एक चैलेंज बन गया वो. तो एकलव्य की स्टोरी एक अलग स्टोरी है, और समाज को बहुत सारा प्रबोधन करने वाली वो स्टोरी है.
I also believe that there's a great learning from Eklavya that you can actually without a teacher, but just the mere inspiration can actually make you as good. Again, the question was I missed. There was one more question, Aditi, which came up. Ashwatthama is a very fascinating character, and he is Dronacharya's son, but his father continues to, consider Arjun as his pet disciple. No doubt, Arjun was a fantastic archer, and he always felt left out. And it's a very tragic hero in Mahabharat and cursed not to die. I would ask Kaka Sahib about Ashwatthama, और आप अश्वत्थामा के बारे में कुछ बता सकते हैं कि आपकी आपकी किताब में अश्वत्थामा के बारे में क्या लिखा है और क्या
अश्वत्थामा के बारे में जब हम सोचते हैं तो अश्वत्थामा का जो कैरेक्टर है वो जैसे यानी जैसा दुभंग होता है, यानी दो तरफा हो जाता है, वैसा कैरेक्टर है। एक तरफ तो वो एक ब्राह्मण का पुत्र था और वो ब्राह्मण कुतास्थ था, बहुत सारा वो ज्ञानी था ब्राह्मण, और उससे उसने विद्या हासिल की थी। एक बात ये हो गई। और दूसरी बात, वो ब्राह्मण दरिद्री था, यानी उसके पास धन नहीं था। जीने के जो तरीके थे, यानी जीने को जो जो संघर्ष उसे करना पड़ा अश्वत्थामा का, वो भी उसका एक अनुभव था। और उसके बाद में द्रोणाचार्य ने अपना पुत्र कृतास्त्र बना दिया, और फिर ये अश्वत्थामा द्रोणाचार्य इनका संबंध कौरवों से आ गया। यानी ब्राह्मण और क्षत्रिय इन दोनों के बीच में ये संबंध आ गया। तो अश्वत्थामा को ऐसा लगता था कि अर्जुन श्रेष्ठ है, ठीक है, अश्वत्थामा भी श्रेष्ठ था, लेकिन उसका जो कैरेक्टर है वो कैरेक्टर यानी यानी उसका दुभंग हो गया था। दुभंग का मतलब यह है कि वो ऐसे दो तरफा हो गया था। एक तरफ तो वो ब्राह्मणिज्म उसका ये था, और दूसरी तरफ क्षत्रियों के साथ उसे उतना ही वो कैपेबल था। तो अश्वत्थामा का कैरेक्टर सोचने जैसा है। उस पर और दुर्योधन के संपर्क में आने के बाद द्रोणाचार्य पांडवों की तरफ झुके हुए थे, लेकिन अश्वत्थामा का झुकाव जो था तो वो पहले न्यूट्रल था। उसके बाद में द्रोणाचार्य की हत्या होने के बाद वो दुर्योधन की तरफ ज्यादा झुक गया, और उसका सेनापति, अंतिम सेनापति वही था, और उसने जो जघन्य कार्य किया, पांडवों के जो पुत्र थे वो मार दिए उसने। लेकिन और फिर इसलिए उसको मौत है ही नहीं।
Aditi, thank you, sir. The question was कि Dr. Pratibha Rai has written a fascinating book on Yagyaseni, Draupadi, and maybe I have not read the book, but because you studied Gandhari and other characters, on your views on Draupadi, it's a fascinating character. It's a very complex, layered character of Draupadi. There are a lot of people who, believe that she was one of the strongest women. At the same time, a lot of people comment her on having 5 husbands and not being loyal to either of them. While I have not read Yagnaseni, what would be your views on Draupadi? And then I could ask Kaka Sahib to answer that.
Yes, Draupadi is a great heroine, and even in the most difficult, unforeseen of circumstances, in a society where but how through strength of character, through intelligence, through courage, and nishta and dharma, one can still prevail. So Draupadi, if you see what happens in the Vastaharana scene, when she starts off as this and any woman in that situation would just be a victim, but she comes out as actually the winner in that, and how she does that. So when she is being pulled into the assembly hall, she says, "Go back and tell them I have these questions. Let them answer these questions, and then I will come." And she does this twice or 3 times. She puts all the elders on the spot, demanding that her question be answered. She does this repeatedly. And even when against her will she's forcibly brought, she still retains her wits. She does not lose her mind, even when her husbands, in a sense, have fallen on the wrong side of dharma. And then, of course, there's the famous moment when she calls out to Sri Krishna. But it's always that it was dharma that saved her, because that dharma was within her. She was acting dharmically. And then I think one of the great lessons for us and the greatness of Draupadi is after all of this is done, and Gandhari even tells Dhritarashtra, this can't go on. Vidura tells Dhritarashtra, this has to stop. And the king himself realizes it has gone too far. And he says to Draupadi, ask any boon of me. And all that she asks is that her husbands be restored. And he keeps asking her to ask for more boons. And then she says, no, I will not take any more boons. This is as many boons as a kshatriya can take, and the rest we will do through our own dharma. And so a few things there. One is that at that moment, when it would have been very easy for her to divide herself from her husbands, and everyone would have sympathized with her, she does not do that. She's loyal to them. And at that moment, when Bhima is so angry with Yudhishthira, and he's almost wants to kill him, she keeps all of her husbands together. And it's a very remarkable moment, because at that time you can imagine, like, Shakuni's plan, Duryodhana's plan was so close to coming to fruition. But it is she who holds them together. And then the last thing is keeping her dignity and not taking what she would consider to be charity from the king. So all of those things, it's a remarkable moment. And I think someone, a lot of times people say, oh, she's always so angry, or somehow she's emotional, or she's arrogant. But actually, in that moment, she's so quick-witted. She doesn't give in to emotion, and she handles herself not just as a wife, but also as a queen. So I think that's remarkable. And throughout the Mahabharata, we see this. In fact, it is said she was always the last to sleep. So not only was she looking after her husbands, but also all of the subjects and the people in the palace and things like that. So she's a very remarkable character in that way. But I think I've gone on for very long because I get very excited about this. But I'd very much like to hear Kaka Sahib's views.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's fantastic, because such a complex, fascinating character, proud, and yet at the same time very, very practical about how she should address that. Kaka Sahib, द्रौपदी के बारे में आप कुछ, एक प्रतिभा राय, डॉक्टर प्रतिभा ने याज्ञ सेनी करके किताब लिखी है जो बहुत बहुत पॉपुलर है, मैंने पढ़ी नहीं है वो, पर एक कोई पूछ रहे थे कि आपकी द्रौपदी याज्ञ सेनी के बारे में क्या राय होगी, क्या बताना चाहेंगे आप?
जाति के लिए अभिमान का विषय थी द्रौपदी। तो द्रौपदी ने अपने पतियों को तो संभाला ही, लेकिन वो एक क्षत्राणी भी थी। अपना जो क्षत्रिय ये है, क्षत्रियत्व जो है, उसने कभी छोड़ा नहीं, कभी स्वाभिमान छोड़ा नहीं। और हमेशा जब भी उसे दबाने की कोशिश की, जैसे कोई मशाल होती है तो वो अगर नीचे की जाती है तो उसकी ज्वाला ऊपर आती है, वैसे जब भी द्रौपदी को दबाने की किसी ने कोशिश की, उतने ही तेजी से, उतने ही जोर से वो उभर के ऊपर आए। तो द्रौपदी का कैरेक्टर बहुत सोच समझकर व्यास महर्षि ने लिखा हुआ है, और स्त्री जाति के लिए एक अभिमान का विषय द्रौपदी है। अपने जो महाभारत का युद्ध हुआ, उस युद्ध में हम देखते हैं कि कृष्ण शिष्टाई के लिए जा रहा था, तो अर्जुन और भीम और युधिष्ठिर सब ऐसे सोच में थे कि किस लिए ये झगड़ा मोल लेना है। लेकिन अकेली द्रौपदी थी, उसके लिए राज्य इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं था, उसके लिए स्त्री का जो अपमान हुआ था, उस अपमान का बदला लेना, या जिन्होंने, जिस पुरुषी प्रवृत्ति ने वो अपमान किया था, उन्हें शासित करना, उन्हें दंडित करना, उसके लिए बहुत जरूरी था। और ये जरूरी इसलिए भी है कि समाज के जो दो पहिए है, एक तरफ स्त्री है और एक तरफ पुरुष है, तो स्त्री का भी सम्मान बहुत ऊंचा होता है, और वो इस्टेब्लिश करने की कोशिश द्रौपदी ने की। अगर द्रौपदी नहीं होती तो ये महाभारत का युद्ध भी नहीं होता।
Right, absolutely.
So I think we just have a minute or two left. I would like to ask if either of you have any final words you would like to share with the audience.
Yes, I I really loved doing Duryodhan mainly because it attracted me to know what the story of the so-called Kauravas who were always considered losers was, and what is it that they were trying to tell. Because invariably we tend to make the Pandavas as the heroes and not really look at some of the other characters in Mahabharata. So I really enjoyed doing the book purely from it started as a curiosity to really know uh, what did Shakuni think? Why did he spend so many years in Hastinapur, leaving his own kingdom? Because he wanted to ensure that his nephews got their rightful dues. His sister was not getting what she demanded, but her sister had chosen to stay blind, to be loyal to her husband, and he comes with a lot of angst, and he wants to ensure that his nephews do not are not they get their rightful due. I think on the whole, it was a fantastic experience for me to do this book, and I look forward to many such projects where we get a chance to retell our classics, which will appeal to the current generation in a language which is simple and easy to understand, and characters which are fascinating but may not have been read either in the vernacular or so far in any language.
Kaka Sahib,
Ah,
Sir,
uh, huh.
I'll just give a little introduction about some of the other books he's working on, and maybe he can talk about some of the books. सर आपले जे नवीन काही बुक्स आहे किंवा हिस्ट्री आणि हिस्टोरिकल फिक्शन, इसके बारे में आप कुछ बता पाएंगे?
अब मैंने दारा शिकोह पर लिखा है, औरंगजेब का जो बड़ा भाई था दारा शिकोह पर लिखा है। मराठा जनरल संताजी पर एक नॉवेल मैंने लिखी हुई है। दुर्योधन पर तो है ही, और अकबर के खिलाफ जो लड़ा था पानीपत पे,
This is
सेकंड
the book
बैटल
on
ऑफ पानीपत। यस यस, दारा शिकोह, सेकंड बैटल ऑफ पानीपत। वो हेमू ने जो लड़ाई लड़ी थी, हेमू के बारे में मैंने एक नॉवेल लिखी है। अब मेरे पास यानी मेरे सामने एक प्रोजेक्ट है, बहुत बड़ा प्रोजेक्ट है। तो मैं वो 1857 का स्वातंत्र समर जो है, तो उस पर मैं सोच रहा हूँ। उसके नोट्स मैं अभी एक एक करके कलेक्ट कर रहा हूँ। तो
on 1857.
वो एक बहुत बड़ा प्रोजेक्ट है, और मैं उस पर काम करने जा रहा हूँ।
Wonderful. I very much look forward to reading those books once they're translated.
Thank you, thank
I
you.
have a question for you, Aditi. That you wrote the fascinating book on Gandhari, and you have delved a lot into Mahabharata and looked at different characters. So, is there some character which comes to your mind which you would like to work on, or you're already working on?
Yes, I'm actually working on a book about Kunti. So
Oh, yes.
it's very interesting. It's any of these characters, at first glance I thought would be very simple, but then they're so complex, so remarkable in their own ways. So any of these characters they just become very fascinating and engrossing. So I'm working on that right now.
Wow! And when do we expect any timelines on when do we expect that book to come out?
Maybe later this year, next year, we'll see.
I see.
But hopefully soon.
So again, I mentioned this Dara Shikoh because this was an interesting character, which is again, it's kind of a loser because Aurangzeb killed him, and he didn't get a chance to, otherwise he would have been the ruler.
Mm.
And that's a book I'm studying right now because again, it got me excited that a character about which very little is known except for a few lines that Aurangzeb killed him, and he was a very secular person who had read a lot of Indian philosophy. He wanted to get all religions together. So fascinating, multifaceted personality of which very little is known. So I'm studying that book, and hopefully that might be one of the translations I might do going forward with Amazon.
Oh, wonderful. I very much urge everyone to read Duryodhan. It's almost 600 pages, but it's written so grippingly, and there's so much insight to it. It moves so quickly. Like I read through it in a few days, and I really loved it. Everyone should read it. So I very much hope many people will read it. And it was an honor to have this conversation with you. So dhanyavad Kaka Sahib, and dhanyavad.
Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Thank you very much. We loved it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.